Keith is open to having questions, so if you'd like to log anything in the chat, and we'll answer questions as we go along, and I'll field them for Keith. And please mute your mic if you're not speaking, and obviously unmute when you've got a question. Thank you, Keith.
My pleasure. Right, apologies in advance, because this one is made up of about 300 million tiny little bits of information for you in kind of, and I've tried to put it into as much order as I can. But even then, there's going to be a lot of jumping between screens, a lot of jumping between bits of apps, bits of code, bits of this, bits and the other. So apologies in advance if it kind of goes all over the place, but hopefully you'll get the general gist of what I'm talking about, and you might even agree that this could be the way of doing things. This is me. I'm Keith Watling. I'm a solution architect at AIS, Applied Information Sciences. For some reason, unbeknownst to me, I'm a Microsoft MVP for Power Platform. Still haven't figured out why. But today I want to talk about a subject that's very close to my heart, which is reusable components. Because I'm really lazy, right? I never have enough time. I've got 3 kids. I've got a girlfriend. I'm trying to have a social life. I work for an American company, which means that kind of my day starts a bit later and ends a bit later. And I never, ever seem to have enough time to build the apps to the level of quality that I personally want to have them built to. And I especially mean that from the sales perspective, right? So if we think about kind of reusable concepts, what do we really kind of mean by that in a Power Platform state? Like, what does it mean to have them in the first place? So, like, I often get told, well, it takes 5 minutes to build a Power App. I mean, you know, everyone knows app in a day. Well, you can build it in a day, can't you? You know, and you're sitting there thinking, okay, yeah, I can build it in a day. I can build the underlying data model in a day. I can build all the interaction in a day. I can build a decent user interface in a day. I can do all of the flows and the back end stuff in a day. And if you're really lucky, I can stick a Power BI dashboard together in a day. No, I can't. No, I can't. That's ridiculous. Like this kind of notion of app in a day makes everybody believe that Power Platform is fast, not complex, and not great quality, right? Low code, no code does not mean low complexity or low quality. And part of the reason that we have this, you know, Power Platform is app in a day. So we've got to love it. We've got to embrace it. We've got to turn around and say, yeah, okay, we'll go with the Microsoft speech. But when our own internal sales team start believing it, and your own department start believing it, and your own boss starts believing it because they've seen app in a day, it means you've got to move faster, right? And the only way to move faster is to slow down a little bit and have a think. So the first time I kind of like really thought about this was from a lady called Audrey Gordon, who is the Microsoft Power Apps community champion at Microsoft a few years back. She's a survival freak. She loves survival, absolutely adores it. She's walking around, and she said to on a call one day, and we were talking, and she said, Keith, I've got this thing called an EDC, an everyday travel kit, right? An everyday sort of, you know, this everyday survival kit. And I take this thing everywhere with me, she said, and I've started applying it to everywhere in my life. And I said, well, that's really interesting. What does that mean? So she said, well, I've got a bunch of apps, and I've got a bunch of Power BI, and I've got a bunch of PowerPoint as well to do my presentations, where if someone says to me, I need you to go and speak on this subject, I need you to demo this thing, I can just whoop it out, run at the screen, plug in my USB stick, obviously in the cloud these days, and I can just kind of go, right? I'm wherever I need to be. I'm ready all the time. And I thought that's really interesting. And then Audrey came along, and Chaz, the current community lead for Power Platform, and we were talking, and they said, well, look, what's the first thing you do every time you open a Power App? What's the first thing you do when you go make new app, make new flow? And I thought to myself, well, that's a really good question, because every time I'm sort of confronted with a blank screen, and that's kind of terrifying. And I've always got to start from scratch, or I'll build an app from data, and it's just be horrible. So I came up with this. This is before we had components, before we had component libraries, before anything. This was the lazy template. I came up with this really lazy template that had a bunch of collections in it, a bunch of styles that you could use to make your apps faster, right? So what I mean is not performance faster, but actually build faster. And all of the controls on the screen, you can see there those little kind of buttons and the combo boxes and the text and everything. They were all wired up to a set of collections, right? And they were all using lookups. And you know what? It was a good idea. It was a good idea, but it was terribly implemented. I'll put my hand up and say it wasn't the best implementation in the world of doing that. But it did work, and it meant that you could copy and paste the controls from that particular screen, from one screen elsewhere in the app, and they were already linked up to the styles and various other bits and pieces to make that work. And it was okay. And then my very good friend Sancho Harker came along, and Sancho is a bit of a genius. He went through Power Apps like a dose of salts, and he said, I'm going to find out what is in these MS app files. So that's exactly what he did. He downloaded it, he took it apart, he put it back together again, and he made this new template, which is super, super, super cool. And that's when I started getting really lazy, because once Sancho had made his template, I was like, okay, there's a bit more here. There's somewhere between what I had, what Sancho had, and using Power Apps components. That's the kind of the panacea, the thing to solve absolutely everything, right? Do excuse me while my cleaner walks in behind me, because she's just come in. And so that was the kind of the general sort of panacea for everything. And I thought to myself, well, there's got to be, this is quite good. We can have a really great kind of all catch-all template that will do absolutely everything I want. So, and I'm gonna share with you right now at the beginning, so that if you've got another session that you'd rather be at, you can see the secret sauce. I'm not going to hold it to the last minute and drag it out. I'm going to share the secret sauce with it right at the beginning, and then we'll go through the secrets step by step. Right. So the first and most important thing for reuse in the Power Platform is to create or use a set of coding standards. I would always recommend the Microsoft coding standards, because I was a technical consultant that helped write them, but I will always recommend using them because it's a one-stop shop for doing everything. That said, that will not save you when it comes to doing custom components, and like a good template, and I'll show you why in a minute. Sancho's template, right? Make your own version of Sancho's template. Sancho's template is absolutely awesome, and I'll show you why in a minute. But it's slightly limited by the fact that there's only certain number of linkages that Sancho's made to a certain number of colors. So you kind of want to go a little bit deeper, and I wholeheartedly recommend that you spend your time and tear that apart and make your own template off of Sancho's base. And do use Sancho's base, because he's done 99% of the hard work for you. So you've only got to do a tiny little bit. Then it's time to make your components. So then you go off and you go into the component library, or just making them as components, but component libraries are best. Make your components, make them scalable, make them fully responsive, make them as simple as possible, right? Make them complex enough to be robust and to be usable everywhere, but don't make them overly complicated in terms of their implementation or their use, right? Now, once you've made components in Power Apps, one of the issues is every time you bring that component into your app, you've got to wire it up, and it's a pain in the neck, because the collections are, if you've got a collection here and you've got a collection there and you're making a component that kind of talks to a collection outside, that's a pain in the neck, right? An absolute pain in the neck. So you've got to have kind of, you then got a component that's doing something that you don't want it to do by squirting data out of itself and potentially polluting your app, and then changes to the component break everything. So don't do that. I've seen so many people doing that. God's sakes, don't do it. Bad practice, don't do it. The best way to have a component in your app is to create on your template a version of that control, right? So with that version of that control, you then decorate it with all the ancillary bits of pieces of information, all of the colors, the variables, the collections that you need it to have, and then you use that to copy and paste it into your app, because then you've only got one source of the collection, which is in the app where it's supposed to be, not in the component where it shouldn't. Okay, very important. Once you've made that copy, then it's time to kind of start complying with the coding standards, and then it's a case of just copy and paste at speed over and over again. You go to your template, you have your template on one screen, you've got your base template as well, right? So you've got your base Sancho's template, which has got all of the bits and pieces and all the paraphernalia in it you need, right? And then you start bringing your components in, copying and pasting them in. You bring in your buttons that go with those components. You bring in your appendages that go with those components, because components aren't just one thing. They often have appendages that are in an app, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then you bring them in, right? So that's the all-up single pane of glass for reuse, right? Once you do that, you're on your way to success, right? And it's the same with Flow. And I'll show you later on with Flow. Flows are actually a darn sight simpler to have reuse, right? Flow reuse, you just use child flows, right? Just use child flows, dead simple. And I'll show you an example later on of a schema of how that would work for calendar recurrence, for example. When you want to go and figure out the dates of the reoccurrence, best do that in a child flow, right? Best do that in a child flow, and then you can bring it into any solution you like. And you've got those kind of wonderful components. So let us have a look at Sancho's template now. Make sure I get the right screen open here. Okay, so this is Sancho's template, and what that means is Sancho's got some hard-coded variables, right? He's got some hard-coded variables in his app, which means that when he goes and says new button, guess what? The button comes in with the color that's attached to the variable, right? So if we have a look at the fill color for that brand new button, what does it say there? It is pointing already at a variable. How, I hear you ask, Keith, do you do that? Well, it's dead simple. If you haven't seen how to do it, look at Sancho's video, but I'll show you now. You come in, you save it to this computer, right? So you save that to this computer. Once it is downloaded, right? Once it is downloaded, which it will do, you come along, you unzip it, okay? So you unzip it, and it comes in a little kind of zippy folder there, and you're looking for in the references, and there's a bit of JSON called themes, okay? And you open that up into Visual Studio Code, and this is the most code you'll ever see in a Canvas app anywhere. And all this is, it looks terrifying because there's loads of it, right? And it comes in all unbeautified and all gobbledygook. So you just beautify it by sort of, going Control-Shift-P and then beautify file, which is an add-in thing. It's not hard to do. You can find that out on the internet. And it gives you this pretty JSON version here. And you can see in the top, there's a default theme, right? This default theme, which is the theme that your app is using. Okay, it's the theme your app is using. And from this theme, you can then use this. So when you say type X, that means it's a variable and it's going to point to a variable inside of your app, right? Super cool. So what you do is mute that person. And you go through and you say, right, I'm going to point other things at this variable, right? So it's built up of like default theme at the top. And then when you scroll down, you'll see controls starting to appear. So if we come down, we start seeing things like default list box style. So this is everything for the list box, right? And this is pointing back to the palette primary color 1. So when you come up to the top here, this palette is palette primary color 1, primary color 2, primary color 3. And they then point to those variables. And therefore, when you bring things into your app, hey presto, it works, right? Super cool. Million different ways of doing it, million different ways of slicing it. What you'll find with Sancho's template is that the number of variables that you need that he's put in there is slightly less than what you need, right? So you'll probably want to create a variable for the default border color. I found that one that it was all to one big blob of color, Sancho's template. So you'll need the border color, you'll need to do the calendar background, which is the one where, you know, in Canvas apps where everyone hates the date picker. So you can go in and kind of change that date picker style. Where's my date picker gone? There we go. So that awful date picker, when you click on that, you can kind of get you can control all of this granularly. And then you've just got to kind of define those variables in the beginning of your app. And you can define those variables however you like. You can define them using using just hard code, or you can link them to a component library to make it more manageable across your estate. That's quite a good way of doing it. So once you've got that, you then need to think about how to bring your components in, right? So let's go and have a look at some components while I just switch to another. I told you I was going to jump around a lot, didn't I? Right, so here we go. So here's some components, and I've got my progress indicator there, which is not that component. It's in a different bit. Hang on 1 minute. Components, standard components, that one there. Did that one. Sorry, I didn't have that open. My mistake. And what you'll find is that, like, I'm a big fan of keeping components ridiculously simple from an execution standpoint, right? So here's a process flow. I only ever use black and white when I'm doing components, right? I try to avoid using any color whatsoever so that everyone knows that they've got to style it up, right? Very important. But the problem is like, you know, I don't want to have to kind of go and style this component up every time in my app. So I've got my component. It's fairly responsive. There's a whole ton of properties down the side there that indicate just the colors, right? Just the colors. And with the new output behaviors, you can do all sorts of crazy things with these components. Same with the profile. You know, very, very simple components to be used over and over and over again. So what I then do in my apps is I start using variables, right? And the kind of the trick to using variables is not, and I see it so much, and it was one of the reasons why Canvas apps are so cumbersome to develop at speed, is that there are variables everywhere, right? 1,000,001 variables. Everyone creates one variable. They create a variable called combo box submit, combo box reset, combo box color border, combo box color border 1, column, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And that's madness, because like, or then what they do, they say, right, well, I don't like that. There's too many of those, so I'll use collections. And the worst thing about collections is you can't find where they are in your app unless you break them. And then you're using lookup values for your columns, and that's just terrible. Just don't do that. Please don't do that. That's a really bad idea. So the easiest way of doing it is to start at the very beginning of your app, right? And to have a set of, almost like in the good old days of VBA, having constants and having enumerators, right? And they're not quite enums and they're not quite constants, but you know what? They're the best I can do, so stuff it, right? So what I do is I have a set of variables at the beginning of my app, right? Always at the beginning of my app, and I put them in the on app start. Although that's not always the best place to put them, that's where I put them. You could put them elsewhere. I'd put them in on visible if you can, but I put them in on app start when I'm developing, so that I can easily respawn them just by the right click on app start, just by running on app start, and then I'll move almost everything out of on app start into on visible when I finish developing my app, right? So I'm using these. Why am I using these? And you can see that this variable, this global modals variable, for example, here, is made up of a set of records, right? It's made up of a record with a number of values inside it. This is so I can use dot notation. This is so I can use global, and let me zoom in so you can see that. Make it a bit bigger. Is that better? Hopefully that's better, and you can see that now, right? So I've got my global variable there. So now when I'm in my app, I can go GBL modal types.error, GBL.modal-types.main, and it's referencing that. They could be numbers, they could be text, they could be other records, they could be colors, they could be whatever you want. But the dot notation means that I can move faster, and it means that I am not receiving errors in my app because I'm only ever referring to one thing, right? And if the variable breaks, it breaks the app, right? And if I've made a spelling error, if I was going sort of like, if this variable equals, there has been an error, and I type that, if I make a typo, if I change the text somewhere, I'm going to break my app and there's going to be hell to pay all over the place, right? Bad practice. Don't do it this way. So using my wonderful dot notation, you can see here what I've done, right? I have got a variable here, and look, I'm using it to show a menu, right? I'm using it to show and hide a menu, and I've got like different variables locked up to different things. So I've got menu 1, menu 2, menu 3, and I'm saying whether it's true, false, submit, this kind of thing. And I'm just going through and I'm switching the values, right? But that's kind of terrible because, right, this thing here has got, look, my dot notation, lovely, right? And my menu type, and I've got sausages and all that kind of stuff. And I'm referring back to that global variable type there, right? And that's true. But I'm rewriting this variable every flipping time. It's awful. Like I've got to rewrite the whole variable every time, because if I only write a little bit of it, it blanks the rest of the variable. Because variables, when they write the entire variable every time. So you have to keep writing the entire variable. And that was driving us all absolutely potty, right? So one of the ways around that, what's the ways around it? So you can see here, like, you know, So a very, 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 very clever boy at Shane Young's Power Apps 911, one of his developers, just absolutely blew everyone away by using patch to patch a variable, right? And you didn't see this here first. You saw this at the London user group last year. I think it was when Shane demoed it right at the beginning and didn't do it as a demo after we started recording. So this is the first time I've sort of shown it to the public. This is how you patch a variable. So when you patch lock show menu here, you return the entire variable back. You're only changing this bit. So the patch returns everything plus the changes, right? And that was how we got around it. So we could write less code, and we could break that out into a more kind of readable block of code like that, right? And that is how it's done. Cool, isn't it, right? Like I thought that was just like, you know, absolutely awesome. So that makes life much faster, and then I can put that second one up there without changing the third one. You see, that's just proof in the pudding of how that's done. So right, so I'm using my variables at the beginning. I've kind of got this kind of approach. Now I want to look at kind of, you know, that how I now do it. How do I now implement that? So I've got my modal, and this is my most frequently used thing, right? And it's not a component, actually. I don't use a component to do this because components are too inflexible to do this thing. Pop-up modals are two a penny. They are in every app. You cannot get away from them. They'll drive you bonkers, right? So I've got my pop-up modal, and I've got my variable that I'm going to push into the modal, right? And I've got three things I'm pushing into that modal variable. One is to show it or hide it, right? Second of all is some sort of type. I want to give it a type, and I'm taking that from the global variable at the beginning where I've defined what's happening in the app, and then I'm passing in a record, which is just a really elegant way of communicating something to the modal, right? And you might, depending on your modal, have to start looking at how you pass in that record, because you might have to have different types of records for different types of modals, right? So you might do something a bit funky with that, yeah? But this is the simplest version. So there'll be a slight delay when it goes and pulls the first account, and it won't show the account on the screen, by the way, although we could interact with it. And this is how I set my modal up, right? And believe it or not, I'm not using a component. I'm using a container. And inside that container, I will have my modal. So I've got a container inside a container. So my container, my top container, is showing or hiding the modal. My second container is looking to say, what modal am I active, do I show? I use the patch statement inside the variable to show or hide the modal, right? So I can return the entire state of the current modal without having to rewrite where it is, which is great because every time I rewrite the entire variable, there's a chance that I might make a mistake. There's a potential for some errant code or some errant action to write in there, and I'm not maintaining my variable state throughout my action, which is bad practice and we don't want to do. So this makes it less error prone, far less error prone. We know that when we click on that button, we're only updating one thing inside of that variable and it reduces risk, right? So now let's look at, because I want to leave plenty of time for questions at the end and kind of looking at the next bit. Is I want to look at my variables, look at my components, right? So this is the kind of the finished copy and paste view of the world, right? So when I've kind of built my app, I've got my components on the screen, they're wired up to variables, they're wired up to collections. I've got my Sancho's template so that when I hit a new button, it comes in straight away and it's colored up and it's kind of ready to go. So I've got the ability to use a component, bring something complex into the app. I've got my interactivity defined. I've got my variables defined. I've got the color scheme I want. I've got the logos I want. This is what it kind of not necessarily looks like, but this is where I'm going to copy and paste out of into another app, right? So I've got a collection here, and simple collection. I use this one over and over and over again, and this collection exists inside of the app. Right? It doesn't exist inside the component, it exists inside of the app. The component we're looking at is this this process flow here, right? The 4-step process flow. But it's not 4 steps, it's any number of steps because the actions for it are taken from this sample table. And all I've got to do is recreate that table in this app. And what I've done is I've already wired this up to, I've wired that component up to the collection, so that all I've got to do is literally copy and paste that out into my main app that exists inside of the template, right? So I've made that app from the template. And then what I've got is I've got a number of buttons that exist outside of the template because these are the things that interact with the component. And this is the broken bit of components, is that like components very rarely exist by themselves and we're forever wiring the damn things up. Now, all I want to do is just have an elegant process flow along the top of the screen, a little bit like a model-driven app and a Power BI, business process flow. And I want to do that. And I've left kind of coding comments in here to sort of say, like, leave this there, like put this there, all that kind of stuff. So I can kind of move backwards and forwards. And all I've got to do is, and it's all wired up, all ready to go. And I just grab these 3 things. I've got a component at the top, so I'm obscuring complexity. I've got 2 buttons down the bottom. I copy and paste those into my template app, and everything works. And that is how you have fast reuse in Canvas apps. Now you can build and you can get a really fast, like pre-sales demo up and running at speed using these techniques. And all that is required that you then do is to spend a little bit of time polishing the user interface and making it look pretty, which we all know is the bit that really takes the time, not anything else, like data. So that is my kind of all up way of doing it. Now, the one bit that I've neglected to inform you is when we come to Sancho's template, there is a bit of code that I'll share with you on where's my clicker gone? Where is it gone? It's over here somewhere. All right, I'll share this bit of code with you. Take a screenshot of that. This is the Power Apps, the PowerShell, script to rezip your app. Okay. So in here, when you've made your changes to the MAD template, I forgot to show you this, you've got to run this PowerShell script and it will just ask you what name you want to name it, and it will make an MS app file inside here. So if we run that and we say we'll call it Susan, it will package up that app and give me a new MS app file, and I've just got to go and open that, and bang, my template's made. And once you've made that template, you don't really need to come back and visit it very often. But you'll love Sancho's template. I honestly don't build an app unless it's using that thing. And I wanted to briefly talk about the components of reuse in Flow, right? So, like, don't be scared of using child flows. I know they add a slight overhead in terms of time to your flow run, but don't be scared to use them. This is an idea that I came up with for doing some recursion to doing some reoccurring events. So a customer wanted to kind of do the Outlook calendar, right? They wanted you to have the Outlook recurrence for days, weeks, months. And there's a huge amount of complexity in each one. And we could have just made like a day's flow, a week's flow, and a month's flow based on what the record said. But that didn't really make it very reusable, because all of the schema for the records were linked to that particular customer's implementation. So the easiest way of doing this was to turn around and say, well, these are the parameters for the flow, right? And start thinking of child flows instead of like child flows, but think of them as a function. Like, they are exactly the same as like a good old-fashioned VBA function. And you notice I don't use any other proper programming languages there, because I'm not a proper programmer. But you just pass in those variables to the child flow, those parameters to the child flow, and the child flow returns to you. Guess what? Returns to you a set of records, right? Or returns to you a set of values. So you could put in there and say, I want please give me a set of dates. And I'm going to call the days flow. I want you to return to me for the next 60 days. I want every third day, I want to know what the date is, and it will return to you an array of days. Now that means that you can bring that child flow in anywhere. So why not use that kind of that methodology and use the power of the platform to conquer the issues that the platform throw up, which is this reuse at speed. Because it just appears to me that, like, we are constantly reinventing the wheel, and it's driving me absolutely potty and bonkers. And it also, like, you know, in an organization, when you come to start building apps as a team, and development being a team sport, the reuse and common approaches mean that everyone can move faster together. So I will open up the floor for questions, and I will, you know, what I want to know as well is if you guys are doing this, how are you doing it? Because this has been this whole conversation around the reusability and how we can make it work has been driven by the community and our ideas. Microsoft didn't come up with these ideas. The community came up with these ideas. It was, you know, Sancho, me, and a few others. We're the ones who sort of said, this is too difficult. Everyone's moaning at me. I need to go faster. I need to go faster. Feel free to unmute and ask any question you like. I don't mind. Yes, I am, Ginger. Yeah, yeah. Let me see. Anything in the chat?
No, nothing in there.
Oh, well, I've done a terrible. Either I've done a brilliant job and I've answered everybody's question, or I've no one understands a word of what I said. I would say one of the best ways of kind of you know, seeding Sancho's template is using component libraries. So I would recommend that from a governance standpoint, because that really helps to kind of, you know, centrally govern the app. And then you want to kind of simply kind of integrate this into whatever COE you've got. So and it can be as easy as like just directing people to a template and just use a download command to get them to download it, and it's some information on the screen, and use Power Apps to solve the Power Apps problem. It's always good.
Yeah, we've just got useful, thanks, and that's it. No questions, I'm afraid. Oh, okay.
Scott, yeah, Scott. Right, okay, Scott. So there's a couple of templates. The best place to go for that is if you type in quite literally Sancho Harker Power Apps template. I'll put the link in the chat 1 second. Template Sancho Harker. All right, I'll put the link in the chat. Oh, not the Bing link. The actual link. Come here, come here, come here. There we go. And there's even a link to Sancho's blog, Iron Man Cat, and he's got a video where he kind of walks through how to edit it in Visual Studio Code. Now, once you start getting into that, you'll become more and more familiar with the kind of how a Power App is constructed, and you can do all sorts of funky cool things using that template. You can even bring in your own default bits and pieces and all kinds of things. It's also quite a good place to go if you've got any kind of issues. If you made an app that's premium and then you go and gut it and try to use it for an app that's not premium, sometimes a data source can get left behind, and it's a good place to go and edit it out. Okay, here we go. I've only ever worked with model-driven apps, so I was a bit thrown to seeing all of this. Might be off topic, but what are the pros and cons of using Canvas apps compared to model-driven? It can be styled a lot more from what I can see, but I'm guessing there must be more things versus model-driven app. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that frustrates me with model-driven apps, right, is like they're really fast to build. They're really fast to build if you want to just kind of like throw something up. I've always been impressed when we've done hackathons at how quick model driven is to kind of to go and do. But again, with model driven, you're sort of, you have to create everything from scratch every time. So I suppose like I look for I think the best way of having good model driven reuse is really through a set of kind of standards for your model-driven app, especially layouts and methodologies. Are you going to be are you going to be members of the option set gang or the choices gang, or are you going to be members of having a type entity over the current entity, and how that usual 3-level entity works, where you've got a type, something in the middle, and then all of the properties, appendages, and attributes off the bottom of it. So yeah, there's that kind of thing. I think in terms of like Canvas, the issue is that we're forever told this thing happens really quickly, and it doesn't. The vast reality is it just doesn't have any kind of speed of building. You're creating from scratch every time, and that's a real problem. But I would have a base level accelerator and all that kind of stuff. Like I would think about using some sort of kind of base schema. I know a lot of partners have those, and you might find that that's useful for your apps as well. But it depends. Callum.
Hi, that's really useful actually. Thank you. I've been building a lot of Canvas apps recently, and I've kind of come up against some of this stuff. And one of the questions I had was, have you found any useful way to, like, I might do something and you go, oh, that's really useful, that I don't know, way that I've got the data into that gallery, or I'm doing hierarchical data, and like a piece of functionality, I've kind of been saving them into kind of almost like apps I can then go back to later on and sort of reuse. I wonder if there's any better ways or tips on like just keeping hold of your useful functionality, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, you really need to have like I would almost keep a separate solution in a separate environment if you can, where you need to be cognizant of everything you do and can I make it reusable from the get-go? So rather than kind of like, and I know it's a rush, but like I found that over the years, the more I built with reusability in mind, the more stuff I had at my disposal and the faster I could move and the lazier I could be.
Makes sense.
So kind of as you progress, think about, can I just take this out and spend 15 minutes to tear down to make that reusable, put it in a template and keep that template file with you everywhere you go. Like whatever you do, just don't get out of the habit of going back and updating the master file, right? It's really, really, really important.
Yeah. I think also like
But
commenting on the things it actually does as well, so you don't have to try and decode the code you
yeah,
wrote when you
like,
understood it.
exactly right. Like, so for example, one of the things I would do is that screen I showed, and it wasn't the best example in the world, I admit, but here on this example screen, I would have, I put text in it, and I'd say like, I put a label in because this isn't I'm going to copy and paste out of this thing. This is going to be my template, right? So I'd have in here, I'd say all functionality in this button is in on submit, is in this, that, and the other. I'd say like, leave comments in the code for where to put stuff. So here is like, this is the blank. This is blank. This is ready for you to put your actions in around it. But I would come in and I would comment in here and I would say, add your conditional logic here for blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Like that's where it goes. You can even do, and you note the use of the with statement here, right? And the use of the with statement means that I can kind of, more quickly see where things are. I could even kind of maybe even make this a little bit simpler by obfuscating it more and making it so even more copy and paste. If you look at my Power Apps 101 thing, I don't know if I've got the app here ready to go. I suppose I can flip it open 1 second. So there's bits here where it's like I've just got a copy and paste interactive map, and it's really groovy, but it doesn't need to be a component. But it could be a component, but it doesn't need to be a component. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes components are their own worst enemies by making things too complicated. But you'll see here when this thing loads up, reuse with the with statement, right? So if we look at where, and we look at this, we look here. So you've got this like all the blur gobbledygook of the URL there, and I've just used the with statement so I can just change these things at the top, and I don't need to care, and I can just copy and paste that thing and bung it in anywhere, right? It just that kind of thing, having these little bits locking around just makes life so much quicker. And having one app with it all in as your template, like, so you've got your template of functions, and then you've got your Sancho's naked template. So in Sancho's naked template that's linked to a component library to seed the variables, and you might have in there, I mean, I normally leave in things like the O365 users connector, right? So I'll have a bunch of variables at the beginning of my app as well that like goes and gets the current user state and finds out whether they've got a picture and all the stuff that I'm like gonna probably go and use at some point in the app. I'll just go and do that, but I'll do that in a nice concise function, right? And using those variables as well, using these kind of those variables where they're sort of multi-dimensional, almost an array variable, just makes your development so much faster, because you've got, if this goes wrong, if any of this goes wrong, any of these variables go wrong, it's going to break the upstream variable, and I'm going to know everywhere that's affected, rather than having like a million variables in your apps. And when you come to the variable screen, right, I say it all the time, this screen's like a million flipping rows long, and you've got all these variables. But here I've got very, very few variables because I'm keeping them as multidimensional. So I think that makes it.
Yeah, that's really useful. Actually, I hadn't even thought of doing them like that. That's good.
Yeah,
cheers.
I find that makes things a lot faster. And don't, whatever you do, don't make the cardinal mistake of using collections like I did at the beginning, because when you use a collection, you've got to write a lookup statement, and the lookup statement is going to use text, and collections are quite slow to return data, so it's going to, because they're transitory, so it's going to spill, it's going to impact your app, whereas this is almost immutable. It's always more immutable than a collection is, and it's less prone to kind of those crazy lookup errors because you're using dots and using dot notation. So when it comes to building, like you're so much faster because the IntelliSense helps you. Whereas if you're using a collection and trying to look up records, you're forever writing lookup statements and writing in text in speech marks. It's just stupid. Just use the IntelliSense.
Cool, thank you.
Plus, it does give you things like if I want to look at the color variable, for example, I've got a I think it's called styles. There we go, styles dot colors, and then if I've got thingies turned on, I can't remember if I have. No, I haven't got it turned on in this app. Sorry. You can get a drop down here. You'll get a drop down of all of the colors if you've got the new formula bar turned on, which I don't think I have. Oh, I have. Maybe they've taken it away. You used to get a preview. Why not? Okay. All right. Intriguing. Yeah. Used to return to you all those colors. So. There you go. Anyone else? Here we go, Tom. I haven't used Flow Logic apps for a few months. What's the current best way to call and invoke a child flow? Oh, that's a tricky one. You can use the child, you can make a child flow, but I think the easiest way is still the HTTP connector because it gives you the most kind of ability to do stuff from elsewhere. I'd use the HTTP one personally.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I was just kind of wondering if things had improved since probably like end of last year, basically, because it's kind of okay calling them via HTTP trigger, but yeah, I suppose it can just get a bit cumbersome at times.
Yeah, they did make it better, but just as with everything with Flow, they haven't made it all better yet.
Yeah, I was hoping that there might be like
solutions.
a child app connector or something. So.
Yeah, I find they're the best way of doing it, like just treating them like a function. And all right, it is a bit slower, but it just makes making the damn thing a lot faster. Unless you're a massive fan of that copy and paste thing, I can't quite get into it.
Yeah, of course. All right. Thank you.
Pleasure. All right, I have to dash for a client call. I hope everyone had great fun. Anyone else got any more questions? As a no. Thank you very much for coming to my session. I hope it was useful for you. Do reach out to me on the old Twitter and LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff if you want to know about more, and I'm happy to share with you my lazy attitude to making Power Apps.
Thanks, Keith. I'd like to say thank you on behalf of everybody.
Sure thing.
And we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Awesome. Bye.